You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
Good morning and welcome to America's Web Radio. You're listening to the David's Pick Show, as a matter of fact, and we've got a special guest on today, Mr. Tom Foster, and I should probably be standing as I say that because he's one of the real heroes that came back from Vietnam, was a draftee, as a matter of fact, and served his time in Vietnam. And we're just very fortunate to have him in studio today, and he'll be obviously talking about his tours. Welcome to America's Web Radio, Tom.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And
it's good to be here.
It is. We appreciate you coming in, and we'll be talking about. Okay, well, we seem to be having a little bit of a technical problem, which happens on occasion. Anyway, when did you get drafted, Tom?
October of 1966, about a month after I became 19. That was the magic word back then, the magic number.
19.
19 was it. There was no lottery or anything when I got in.
They came up with the great new idea of the lottery after the draft, and I must say when I went in, I went into basic in the end of '69, first of '70, and we had a mixture. We had part volunteer, part drafted, and part lottery, and there was quite an interesting thing in that it was rather diverse, and I had one platoon that everybody was a college graduate, and it was entirely different from other platoons. You saw all spectrums of the scale, as a matter of fact, as I'm sure you did as well. So anyway, it was a trying time, and it was a time that we talked about a lot of things. Well, if you can be drafted at 18 and serve your country, then why can't you drink, or why can't you this, or why can't you vote? And it was a lot of discussions around Vietnam and that era. So, you went to, I believe you did your basic in Colorado?
Yes, Fort Carson, Colorado. Out of 24 months in the service, I stayed at Fort Carson, Colorado for 15, if you can imagine that.
Wow.
Yeah, something else.
And I think the other thing we have in common is the blue braid, and the light blue braid. And a lot of folks don't know what that means, but it means 11 Bravo, which is light arms infantry. And I don't know, we also had Charlie companies, which were martyr companies, and I don't know what braid they had, but I
think they had the blue.
They had the blue.
They had the blue too. Yeah, they were right part of an infantry group.
Okay,
they were right in there with them.
We got it yet? Or okay. We both of us. I was told, and I did it anyway, not to wear my uniform outside or off post, particularly if you were traveling through airports or anything like that, or train stations and whatever. And I didn't make the mistake. I was proud to be in the Army, and I wasn't anything like you, and I don't profess to have been anything. I was a reservist, but I was proud that I'd gone through the infantry training and AIT, Advanced Infantry Training, and I didn't, it wasn't as I look back on it, I had it very nicely, and I enjoyed Fort Ord, and I enjoyed the people that you got to meet, and I was proud to wear a uniform, and I came back with my blue infantry braid. Yep. And my ascot, is that right?
Yeah, that's a blue ascot you wore. Yeah.
And was spit at, not on, but spit at, coming through Hartsfield. And it was I don't want to say humbling. It was just I couldn't believe, and even by the time I got back into Atlanta, friends that I knew in my platoon and in my company had already died in Vietnam, and and I just couldn't understand why people wouldn't have respect for the uniform.
Somebody got in there and turned things around, didn't they?
Oh yeah.
That's basically what happened. I think they pretty well had a lock on some of the news media, and they could get about anything over that they wanted. It was very sad. I was the same as you when I came home from Vietnam. I went through Fort Lewis, Washington, and I came home in October of '68. I knew the stuff was going on in some of the airports, but they didn't tell us not to wear our uniform or anything at that time. We could go ahead and wear your uniform, and it wouldn't have been a good idea to spit on me. I'll just tell you that. Yeah, it could have been very embarrassing for the guy who did that.
Well, it was people just didn't understand, and it was a war that it's sort of like the Carter Classic during the Iranian situation, when he sent the planes in and was going to rescue I'm not. This is not criticizing the United States. Some of the leaders, and I've said this on many shows, is that if the United States has ever failed in anything, it's foreign policy, and it's because we. And as you mentioned when we were talking out in the lobby, you've been there, done that in many countries, and many of our politicians have never been anything but politicians and have never gone anywhere, much less been shot at. And for them to make decisions, and if one thing that we've always, in my opinion, had a problem with is foreign policy. Now, I'll go a step further. That was true in Vietnam. We thought all wars were fought on an open plain, and you could see your enemy since the Revolutionary War, and one platoon would stoop down as the other one shot over them, and so forth and so on. And we found out in Vietnam that there's a jungle out there, and that's a whole different thing. And then we did like the Carter Desert Classic. He didn't know what dirt would do to an airplane, and we found out about that. And after Carter's debacle, when we went into Desert Storm and so forth, we were prepared, and they had adjusted the tanks and everything else to handle, and the helicopters. Speaking of helicopters, what was the best sound you could hear in Vietnam?
The chop, chop, chop of a chopper coming in to either give you aid or to rescue you or take you to the hospital. One or the other, usually. I think they were all over the place.
And those pilots, if I had a hat on, I'd be taking it off and saluting them. The pilots that flew the Hueys and flew the dust-offs, and folks, if you don't know what a dust-off is, and unfortunately you got to fly in a dust-off, I think.
A couple times. That's called an air ambulance.
Air ambulance, exactly. And those guys just were amazing in my book. And the nurses, and we're going to have Donna Rowe on next week, I believe, and she was a dust-off nurse, and Vietnam, in my opinion, again, was so different from any other war that we had ever fought. And you're over there listening on your TIAC or your Akai that we're not in a real war in Vietnam. What do you say to that?
To get a real good description of the war, I heard this said years ago, and I thought, boy, that sounds about like what it was like. Now, we went over there, I went over there to defeat the communists, to stop the communists from spreading all over the world. That was my idea, and we were going to go in and whip them, literally beat them. Well, the old saying used to be, fight with one hand tied behind your back, win the battle and not the war. That was a bit different. Yeah, in World War II and those kind of wars, they used every weapon in our arsenal. In ours, no. Very seldom even B-52s, and never any nukes by any means. So, but we handled the enemy quite handily. Our leadership just kept letting us down time after time after time.
You know, they would make promises and then not. And I guess something else that a lot of folks don't know, but this was not only a political war, or Vietnam was not only a political war, but it was also a financial war that unfortunately our president at the time, Mr. Johnson, and his wife, Lady Bird, made $1 kajillion off of. I have a good friend that was shore patrol, and they would handle anything on sort of like the Coast Guard, but the shore patrol was Navy, and they would guard and quote and protect incoming vessels that were bringing in supplies to the military. And I don't want to say scuttlebutt, but because it wasn't, it was the truth. They knew what the hell they were doing, and somehow or the other, Lady Bird's ships would come in. They would be put first in line by the yard. I think it was a yard master. Is that right?
I think that's what you call them.
Yeah, and somehow they would get bumped to the front of the line, get unloaded, and back out to sea to go pick up another round of supplies. And it's unfortunate that we had a president that was that callous and that money hungry, that and other stories that we haven't heard about of and won't hear about probably of the things that went on, and the contraband and the black market of Vietnam and everything else. But it was an amazing war. Let me ask you, draftee going in, I guess you're about 19, you said?
19 to 21.
19.
That was a magic word.
So, you had to be a little concerned about going. What did you find out, and what was the first impression that you got going out to Colorado and going into basic?
It's really kind of humorous, because as young kids, still in high school, Vietnam was starting up, okay, and a lot of our dads were World War II veterans. So we'd get out on the football field or just out hunting together or fishing together, and we'd start discussing it. I remember one of my buddies, he had the answer to it all. He said, look, my dad fought in World War II, he said, and yours did too, Foster. He said, but look, it's 1960 now. That war lasted 4 years. So we won't even be out of high school, and it'll be over. And that's the kind of, we thought that was the case. And if they would have fought to win that war, that would have been the case, because no one can stand our full military might if we decide to unleash.
And we didn't start doing anything until the B-52s started dropping their packages.
Operation Linebacker 2 in December of 1972, in 11 days, the enemy threw in the towel that quickly. Isn't that sad? After 10 years of bloody ground fighting, and there's a book out, 11 Days of Christmas it's called, and you can get that, and it's by a guy who witnessed all of it and wrote about it. He wrote about the enemy gunners, and he wrote about our B-52 pilots, and that was something.
And where were you sent initially in Vietnam?
Around Cu Chi, Tay Ninh. It was during the Tet Offensive, so anywhere the enemy was, and you and I had our blue braid on, anywhere the enemy were, we were. And we had plenty of people to tangle with, if you know what I mean, because they were looking for trouble, and so were we. During the Tet Offensive, I believe they slipped about 80,000 spare troops in our area that caused quite a problem for us. But we handled it. It wasn't any fun by a long shot. Went 20 hours a day, 7 days a week, and sometimes longer.
Do you still stay in touch with some of the friends that you made in Vietnam or in?
I have a few. If you recall, about 90% of those casualties on that wall in D.C. were infantry.
Right.
And so not all of them are left.
Are you familiar with the fact that the Johns Creek Veterans Association
Yes.
has the wall.
Yes,
and the
that's
portable-
quite a thing. They've
and,
got quite a veterans memorial there, from what I've heard.
Yeah, and that's how I got all of this started as far as the station goes with
Oh, wow.
some of those. I've been to it, and they, even with my saying I don't feel I'm a veteran, certainly
Sure you
not
are.
qualified
You're a veteran.
like they are and like you are, but they've been super nice, and we're going to support them, and they're going to be having the wall up very shortly again.
Yes.
And so I want to talk about the Georgia, because I had until I went to the JC meeting, I was totally unaware of the Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame, and you have been brought into the Hall of Fame, and they're having Rick, who's sort of in charge of it all, Colonel.
Rick White, yep.
He was mentioning the other day that they got an indoctrination coming up in November.
Yes.
Down in Columbus, Georgia.
Yeah, Fort Benning area.
Fort Benning, yeah. And I just want to tell everybody that it's downtown, Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame. And as an inductor, what is it? As a member of it, inductee, what has it meant to you, Tom?
It gave me full stripes to say I'm a veteran now. If you recall, we got a bad homecoming, and a lot of guys for the longest time, it wasn't necessarily me, were afraid to pull their head out of the sand when they came home. And when I was put up for that medal, I didn't think I had a prayer. And they go over all your military records and so on, and I was finally inducted. And what that validated my whole military existence of 2 years, and all the Purple Hearts I got and all that stuff. For once, and here's a beautiful medal that they gave us. It's just a gold medal, and that made me whole. I got it on in my shadow box back home, and it's the greatest. I appreciate Rick White and Paul Longyear and their whole crew for what they've done for the veterans.
You know, with all that went on as you were coming back and everything else, and as I look at Vietnam friends, I don't think there's a more humble group of people than Vietnam veterans. It's they sort of scratch one foot and say, "Oh shucks, not me,"
Yeah.
and they're just a heck of a group of men and women.
They went through a lot that a lot of people didn't go, and that brings you together, basically. And I just enjoy it. I never laugh so hard till a bunch of veterans get together and we start cracking up, because you're just brothers. You become brothers and sisters when you've been through that.
You know, the military in general is probably the biggest fraternity and sorority in the world.
Yep.
And you made an interesting point a minute ago out in the lobby about, you can spot a veteran almost a mile away. And I had recently had an occasion that I was a place and a guy was signing his USAA stuff. And I went up and I thanked him for it, because most people don't have USAA insurance if they've not been in the military.
That's right.
And it just, I appreciate now the fact that veterans like yourself are getting the recognition that you deserved 30 years ago, 40 years ago, coming back from Vietnam. And if I personally, in being in the business and so forth, if I have a real crunch against anybody, it was probably Walter Cronkite, and in my opinion was no hero in the news media or any place else. And back then the networks, if they could have done more harm, I don't know how they could have figured it out. The nightly body bag count of all the stupid things. Just, I mean, I would see that and just, totally shake my head, and we're wondering where our news media is today. Well, that's when we lost it, because they weren't. I was at a radio station back in the '60s that if I had given my opinion on air, I'd have been fired in a heartbeat. And yet today, that's all we have. We don't have news. We have opinions. That plane went down because of some reason, but it went down, and they don't go in. It's not news. It's not a newscast. It's an opinion cast.
It's just one opinion, too. It's not a mixture.
Yep. And it's either that announcer or that producer that's making him read what he's written. And it's a shame, and that's Vietnam turned a lot of things around. During Vietnam, the Chicago riots and stuff, I was in my early teens when all that was going on, and thought, how can our country? I didn't understand, quite frankly.
We were pretty open for a country being at war like that. So I think there was some outside interests that also came in that you couldn't tell them from an American, that mixed in with the populace and caused a lot of those problems. And Walter Cronkite definitely is not a favorite of any of the Vietnam veterans by a long shot. Huh. We just no sooner came back from that bloody Tet Offensive, where we actually gave the enemy a bloody nose, and they were pretty well up against the ropes. And Walter Cronkite says he didn't think we could prevail in the Vietnam War, and here we just lost 17,000 guys in 1968 to prove him wrong. And of course, he speaks to millions.
Yep. We're going to have to take a break. I was sitting here talking when I should have been listening, but I do that frequently, particularly when I like who I have on and what we're talking about. We'll be back with Tom Foster, a Vietnam veteran, on David's Pick right after this. I did let it go a little, but
how long is the commercial?
Yeah, just a couple of minutes.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's interesting. We're having a pretty good dialogue there, David, I think. Gee whiz. Hey, don't ever call yourself not a veteran. You're a veteran. And, I'll tell you something. Back in the day, just to get an honorable discharge or something, you don't know how many people were running and quitting, you remember?
Oh, yeah.
Just to have an honorable discharge.
I got my DD in my office, as a matter of fact.
Oh, yeah. Gee whiz. I seriously now, I wanted to fight the enemy. I knew I had studied enough to know the communists were every bit as bad as Hitler's boys. So, but I didn't expect to go for a tie or anything. No. I expected us to kick their butt.
That was another reason I chose the route that I went, because we weren't trying to win.
No, you could see it once you got there. You thought, oh boy, look at this. We're losing all these guys for nothing, basically.
Do you remember? Did you ever carry a grenade launcher?
Sure. Oh, I shot them all.
Boom.
Yeah, thump gun.
Yeah.
Thump. Boom. Oh, we had that. We had laws, light anti-tank weapons.
I was. And welcome back to America's Web Radio and David's Pick. And my pick today is Mr. Tom Foster, Vietnam veteran. How many tours did you serve, Tom?
I just served one.
Just one,
and
okay.
it was a short one, believe it or not, but it was a very active one.
You know, and if I were to imagine you saw things in Nam that you never anticipated ever seeing in your life.
They were there was some dandy things occurring daily. We were fighting almost on a daily situation there. Very little rest, and I used to tell my dad, "Hey, they had nothing on us in Guadalcanal because we fought just as hard as any of those guys, you know."
You know, the other thing that friends that came back from Vietnam we've talked about, and I'm not going to go into detail, but my best friend, he and I were college roommates, and then when he came back from Nam, we were roommates for a while, and I still talk to him on a frequent occasion. We're just good friends. And he was many years ago, to tell you what kind of guy, he was a Golden Glove champ of Texas. And so he didn't mind getting into a fight by any means, but
Good for him.
he was a platoon leader, and you know, something that the American public, I don't think, could handle, and I still don't think they could handle the truth. And so I understand, I don't want to say cover up, but just it's not as much lying as they just some things are not brought out, and thank goodness some things were not brought out during Vietnam. But my friend has told me many stories about when they would dress up in black and wear the black pajamas of sorts and go into villages and make it look like the Viet Cong was tearing up the village. If they knew they had a village that was supporting the Viet Cong, then they'd go in and wipe it out. And you know, I don't know of any better way to say it than to say it, and that is that the United States, there's a lot of us that think we're saints, but we ain't any more saints than the other guy is a lot of times. And you know, so did you ever experience some of that, or know what?
No, we were straight infantry, mechanized infantry too. We fought on tracks and stuff. I never saw any. That would have to be some special unit, special forces, some CIA guys. Maybe there was a few SEALs over there in Vietnam, very few. Something like that had to do that, or something sponsored maybe by the Vietnamese government. We had one uniform, and that was that old green thing you saw us wearing, and a flak jacket and a steel pot, and that was my uniform.
They don't even call them fatigues anymore.
Well, I don't know what they call them, but yeah, that's right. We had jungle fatigues. They were supposed to be a little more modern than the old cotton ones.
Yeah.
So when you got it dry off quickly if they got wet with sweat, and they do that every day.
And you got different kind of boots back then too.
I had jungle boots, yes
jungle
sir.
Boots,
yeah,
yeah,
they were a little cooler than the others, and they could get wet and wouldn't get stiff and dry and cause your feet blisters. Nothing worse.
It was an interesting and sad war. You know, and I guess one of the things that you all didn't have in Vietnam, which they had obviously in Afghanistan and the desert wars now, is the cell phone, and is the and I've thought many times about my dad when he was in the Navy in World War II. You know, it would be 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 6 weeks, 2 months for a letter to find where it was going, either direction really, you know. And you know, I could imagine just standing there waiting for mail call, and now you can pick up your telephone and
there it is.
There it is. And that's well, let me ask, that brings me to another point. In your experience in Vietnam, how was the morale?
The mail that you were talking about there had something to do with the morale.
Sure.
If you know what I mean. A letter from Susie Q, from Mom and Dad, something like that, to cheer you up a little bit. We even used to swap letters. We didn't have any cell phones. I made one phone call each time I was wounded. I was wounded twice. I got back to the hospital where there was a phone, and I was allowed to make a phone call there. Second time, the same thing, and that was it. A piece of mail, you would just write free on there. You didn't have to have a stamp. A real benefit for us, huh? And I could send that out to my folks. It'd be there in 5 or 6 days. Then they'd send one to me 5 or 6 days the other way. And I used to cherish mail. Oh, I had a cousin sent me a letter every day I was there. How nice.
And whoever was the platoon sergeant or whoever was hollering out names with mail, and I bet the thought went through your head more than once. Check that sack again. I know there's one down there for me.
Oh yeah, that was our goal if there was anything. That was our touch back with the world, and that's what we're supposed to be fighting for.
You know, Tom, I think this is, like I said again out in the lobby, that to have a person as a senator or as a U.S. representative or even serving in an appointed position in government, if they haven't been there and done that, I'm not sure I feel like they have a right to determine what you're going to wear, what you're going to carry as a weapon. And the one that really kills me is engagement, terms of engagement. And I just, unless somebody has, and I don't mean to be speaking out of turn because I haven't been faced with what you were faced with by any means. But still, they should go through basic, they should go through 6 months of AIT or something, or basic training, whatever, before they should be able to tell the man out wearing the boots what he or she should do.
Agree 100%. However, during our war, there was still quite a few World War II's veterans in Congress. Now, one out of 50 maybe, something like that.
Well, I think it's much less than that.
That's sad, isn't it?
Much less than that.
Yeah.
And I think this is a terrible mistake, and it's sort of like voting against NASA. NASA, and back in the 60s and 70s, did more for R&D than anything that's ever happened in the United States. And President Kennedy being able to say we're going to the moon, and we did, by golly, and it spurred on, I just can't believe anybody could be against it. And they'll give to killing babies, but they won't give to R&D and keep us ahead of the game. So
that NASA not just made parts for space and so on, but a lot of the stuff they invented in that area went to the military first.
Sure.
And that was great. And to shut that off for the last 10 years like it has been is a serious mistake.
Well, it seems that one party is convinced that we should give it all away and do nothing. And thank goodness we've got a president that says we should do something and not give it away, but think of ourselves first. And I totally believe in that. And we're supporting a lot of Republicans now, and certainly support the administration. And if that rubs you the wrong way, you look at what he's done compared to what anybody else has done.
Oh yeah.
And
he's right up there with Reagan and all of them.
Yep.
Might even be ahead.
Might even be ahead.
Yeah.
So, with that being said, it's how many years later? 70. It's so 39, 40 years, I guess. Mm-hmm. Have we turned it around?
We're trying. We're trying very hard. I didn't know the enemy was so formidable, but when they have the media and stuff with them, it makes them sound almost like a majority. But I know well they aren't.
It's amazing that, like we were talking about Cronkite and stuff, that just a few words, the effect of a few words can have on the population. And we again, said it many, many times, we have more power for education today than we've ever had. The computer is just absolutely incredible, in my opinion, and you can look up almost anything you want. And we don't do a show here, I don't think, that with a little education, a lot of things could be changed around. I mean, incredible things could be turned around. But we're too lazy to do it. And we've got this situation with vaping now, it's killed 6 people or 7 people now. We've got the drug situation, and
hey, the dumbing down of America
the dumbing
is
down
occurring.
of America.
It's right on target.
Yes, sir. Absolutely right. And as I mentioned again out in the lobby, the idea of rewriting history.
They call that history revisionism, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I looked at a social studies book from middle school, and there were 3 pages in the history book about World War II.
Unbelievable. Probably none about Vietnam.
And I think, maybe a page and a half. So, and it just, I don't know. I've never seen it like this. But there's a good side of the story too, and it's people like you, the organizations and associations that have come out of it that are supporting the veteran. And it's, again, I want to mention because it's Rick has done more for it than anybody can imagine, and
he's got an A+ in my book.
Yes, sir. And that is the Georgia Military Hall of Fame. And everybody that's in Atlanta should go down to it. It's downtown. It's across from the Capitol. And if you're touring the South, coming to Atlanta, put that on the list. It's a lot better than the Atlanta Zoo.
While you're down there at that part, then just step across the street and tour the National Infantry Museum down there at Fort Benning. That's excellent too. Excellent.
I used to love going to the museum at Fort Benning. Yeah. And I guess, and I've said this about a lot of things, and classic car industry and everything else, and I guess it's because I've got such a big nose, but you walk into the museum in Fort Benning and there's just that military smell. You know what I'm talking about.
Surely, yes.
Whether it's the ammo belt or whatever it happens to be, there's a certain aroma and that goes with it. And you can go into an armory, you can go into anything that's military, and there's that certain smell. And so, like I said, I was very claustrophobic, and I still am very claustrophobic, and would have not done well as a tunnel rat. But the old APCs, they were pretty claustrophobic in themselves.
We didn't fight in them, we fought on them. So that was a little more protection in case a mine hit them or something. But yeah, they were some fine targets for an RPG-7. In 5 months, I went through 3 of them.
Wow.
Yeah, that was 1 mine and 2 RPGs. And some did damage to the tracks, and some did both, to the personnel and the track.
And if you don't know what we're talking about, go online and Google armored personnel carrier.
Yeah, M113 armored personnel carrier. You'll see them.
And again, we went into that war, and initially into the Desert War, not knowing. I don't want to say we didn't know what we're doing, but it's hard not to say that. And that we went into Vietnam, and if you wanted a badge of courage or you wanted a badge of stupidity, it was the brass railroad tracks or the brass lieutenant, the 1 bar, the butter bar, and made such good targets. And then we did the same thing, and then I guess Vietnam was where we came out with the camouflage insignias. And
yes, they finally made them dark.
Yeah,
so you couldn't see them.
The black, and they couldn't pick off the officers as well. And then we did the other thing with tracks. And particularly in Desert Storm, where we still had some of the OD green equipment going in,
Yeah.
and we finally wised up that maybe we ought to paint them brown and light brown and camouflage those suckers,
Yeah.
and we did. We learn. We're just sometimes a little slow to learn, I guess.
It's expensive, that slowness too, if you know what I mean. Because
Oh, yeah.
those tracks that we had in Vietnam, I can remember ours were just wide open. You sat up there on that 50 caliber, and there was nothing in front of you. There were protection on the side and the back, but nothing in front of you. Then, as I went around Vietnam on our tracks chasing the enemy around, I saw some other tracks that had a nice shield on the 50 and all those good things. Well, we didn't have that luxury by a long shot, and it cost us too.
Sure. This is sort of not a fair question, but and I give you a little bit of time to think about it. But one thing in Vietnam, what would that one thing be that you always say or you always think about first? And
Well, I lost a good buddy on my armored personnel carrier, and he was more or less playing around when he shouldn't have been, and it cost him his life. That kind of stuff like that. And a real good friend of mine. He was a medic, and I knew him. If I would have got home, we would have called each other up. We'd be going out fishing and hunting, I'm sure, today. But he just can't afford any mistakes when there's people out there trying to kill you, if you know what I mean.
you know, Tom, you just brought up an interesting thing, and our guest next week will be talking about this as well. And I don't think you could praise people any higher than the medics. And a lot of them, and a lot of the public doesn't understand this or didn't even know about it, actually. But a lot of the medics that served in Vietnam were conscientious objectors. And they didn't want to carry a weapon. But they were as brave and as hardy and as heroic as any group going. They went probably down to Fort Sam Houston, went to medic school in San Antonio, and then they would ship over to Vietnam, and their protection was a little bag that had the Red Cross on it. And like he said, you were wounded a couple of times, and the first thing out of the mouth of the guy that was next to you was medic, and yelling for a medic to come treat his friend and treat his brother that's just been wounded. And those medics, just like I was saying about the dust-off pilots, they went in the line of fire to help their brother.
I lost two good medics over there, and you had to be very careful. One was that accident that happened, but two others there. Somebody else medic, you don't let your medic go out there until we've taken care of the problem that happened, if you know what I mean. But they would just blindly go right out there. A couple times I heard it, and it was very sad. And you hear this pop. There went my medic. And that's before the enemy was taken care of, if you know what I mean. That's how gung-ho and how much they just wanted to save us. They were some very, very dedicated folks.
And they were, they were labeled back in the States when they would file to be a conscientious objector. They were called cowards and every other name on the book, and yet they were the ones. God knows, I don't think there's any book written about them how many lives they saved, but it was thousands and thousands of lives that they saved, and they'd jump on the evacs too, and so you bring an interesting perspective. There's always an interesting perspective coming from an NCO as opposed to an officer, because I might be a little bit prejudiced towards the NCO side, but no, the officers, they were great officers.
Sure.
And I don't think, let me ask you, coming out of Colorado and going basically straight to Nam, were you prepared?
As best I could. Nobody's really prepared for mortal combat. But you know, you go over to Vietnam, they give you a little jungle school too about booby traps and stuff like that, and then you go into a unit, and in that unit, every single guy that's in that unit has been there a day to a year longer than you. So it's kind of like OJT.
Yeah.
That's the way they did it, and it wasn't a bad idea. You could not be prepared totally for what we did over there. It was heavy fighting, and I'd say the lack of sleep was one of the things that used to get to you, you know, just no sleep at all. You'd be so tired until that bullet went over your head, and then, boy, you were up and ready to go.
Do you think we had the right supplies?
Yeah, to a certain extent. Our infantry weapons for our guys were no better, though, than the infantry weapons for the enemy. They had that AK-47, and they had that RPG-7, which were some dandy weapons. And with that, they'd usually pick on our straight-legged infantry, and then we'd come to their rescue, because the M16 and the Law was no better than those by a long shot.
They didn't have the Starlight scopes that we had, though.
No, and the Starlight was just fairly good. They'd outline green out there, but yeah, they were better than nothing for a long shot, but nothing like our goggles we got today.
Oh, they're incredible, and you know, we years after Vietnam, thank goodness, R&D, research and development, came along answering questions that were raised in Vietnam, and we got the answers. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with Tom Foster, Vietnam veteran, and in my opinion a hero, and also an inductee in the Georgia Military Hall of Fame. We'll be right back right after this. Volume and stuff's okay? Volume and stuff's okay? Volume's okay? Oop. And we're back on David's Pick on America's Web Radio with our special guest today, Georgia Military Hall of Fame inductee. What did it come out, Sergeant? E5, E6?
E4, actually.
E4.
E4. I was only in Vietnam about 5 months, okay? I was given rank OJT, on the job training, as it would be E5, E6. But the CO, when he told me to take over the platoon or take over a couple of the squadrons, CO never made it back home, back to base camp to make those changes. So therefore, officially, I was an E4. But I had the responsibility you wouldn't believe. Yeah, just, I was combat trained and there, and he'd just say, Foster, you take over the platoon or take over those two squads. And I'd say, okay. And then one time I said, well, sir, I said, you're giving me these positions, and E4, a Spec 4, doesn't usually carry them. Oh, I get back in base camp. I'll change it immediately. He never made it. Yeah.
Well, you're the only veteran that I've had in here that I outrank. I was an E5, so
good for you.
that
rank didn't mean a lot. It was mostly experience when I was in there.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
They wanted a guy that'd get them through alive.
That's it. That was it for sure. Tell me more about the Georgia Military Hall of Fame, from not only being an inductee, but it's being copied now by a number of other states. And as Rick will say, Colonel Rick, as I call him, or Sir, and people can't believe, it's changed so much. When you and I were in, you didn't call an officer by rank, you called him Sir.
Yeah.
Period. That was it. And you call him by rank, and who the hell are you to be calling me captain or colonel or anything else?
That's right. That's right.
You call me Sir. And much less would a sergeant or anybody, any enlisted person, go up and say, Sir, could I buy you a drink? Officers didn't associate with non-coms, and non-commissioned officers didn't associate with officers. That was just, there was a segregation that they don't have today. I mean, my son has good NCO friends, and vice versa. And
you couldn't even go to the same bars, if I recall. The officers had their officers club, EM had their club.
And same way even with golf courses.
Yeah, isn't that
you
something?
had the NCO golf course, and you had the officers golf course, and O Club and NCO Club. And so things have changed a lot. But, as we mentioned a minute ago, though, today or yesterday, it's still the biggest fraternity and sorority going. And I, like yourself, if I'm at the airport, I make it a point to buy any uniformed person their meal.
Pick up their tab. That's the best you can do, and thank them.
And thank them.
Yeah.
And sometimes I will, and sometimes I won't thank them. And the reason being is that I do it out of my heart, not to get thanked by them for, well, thank you for buying my dinner. No, that's not why I did it.
That's right.
I'm doing it because I respect you, and you're serving our country, not my country, but our country. And I don't deserve any acknowledgement for doing something that I wanted to do. So sometimes it depends on the situation, but sometimes I'll just tell the waitress or waiter, just don't even point out who did it, just do it, and here's the money. So things have changed.
Yes, and that Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame is quite an instrument of change. It is. A lot of people think it's just valor that they pick guys on, but believe it or not, achievement and service are two others. And in my class, this will blow your mind, I had a guy named Zell Miller and a guy named Sam Nunn. Now, they weren't in there for valor, they were in there for service. But that's quite a thing, isn't it? So they picked the best of the best, I think, all the way around.
It's if you haven't gone to it, and we're going to keep throwing it out at least every Thursday, if not more frequently. In fact, we're going to get Rick back in here to do some PSA announcements about the Georgia Military Hall of Fame. And I got to ask you one question, because I really think I know the answer, and you keep in mind that we are censored here. So, but how do you like the guys that take a knee? Or spit on our flag?
Just like Walter Cronkite, the same thing. Oh yeah, they. you think all kinds of things when you see them down there, if you know what I mean. But I won't say it here. But they're basically doing the enemy a great favor there. They got the greatest country in the world, and they're just spitting all over it. And that's not good.
Well, I tell you what, there are a couple of ladies in the representatives in the U.S. House that they should put their towel heads on and go back. They don't like it here, then get the hell out of here.
Agree.
And I don't mind Cortez and Omar. They're garbage, in my opinion, and it's not First Amendment right when they say the things that they say.
That's
It's, in my opinion, it's treasonous, and I don't not promoting them being hurt or anything. I just like to see a couple of. I was thinking about this morning. See a couple of good-sized Marines, one on each side, escorting them to the Atlantic and telling them to keep walking.
Now, when you make sure that's female Marines.
Yeah, we got to be politically correct.
Two men there, two
I'm
female
sorry,
Marines.
you're right.
Just come with us.
You're right.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. That
Oh,
would
yeah,
be
that wouldn't
politically
look good at all.
incorrect. No, but yes, I would like to see them escorted and told to keep walking when they got to the edge of the Atlantic.
Me too, and that's the same way with us during Vietnam, the communism. Hey, just go on over there to Russia if you think it's so great.
Yeah.
Go on over there, have a look. They didn't have a clue. And
Or
that's
China,
sad.
as far as that goes.
China, there was a bunch of them. Cuba, yep.
Again, an unforetold story, but I said it earlier, and I've talked to a bunch of friends that are veterans, and generally speaking, I don't know whether the United States or the populace could handle the truth all the time, but I again had a roommate at one time that had been a SEAL in Vietnam, but he was the damnedest guy I've ever met in my life. He was a linguist, and Jerry had the ability, and I've never seen anybody like this, but I saw it in action at a steak and ale one night. But he could go in, and he didn't speak every language in the country or in the world, but he understood it. He could go sit down. We went to steak and ale one night, and he didn't speak Spanish, never taken a Spanish class in his life, and there was a Spanish-speaking table across from us. And in a few minutes, he was telling me what they were saying.
Interesting.
And he was the same way in Vietnam. And Jerry would be let off the shore of China, and just what he did would scare me to death. But he was let off by submarine off the shore of China
By himself?
By himself.
Oh.
And he would swim into China and set up a listening post by himself, and he could pick up, I don't know how many dialects they have, I have no clue really, but he could pick up whatever he was listening to and translate it, and then 2 weeks later or a week later or whatever the plans were, he'd swim back out to that location and be picked up by submarine and head back and go through a grilling of what he had found out.
That's
and
something.
and I never knew anything like that was happening, nor did many people. But that was his job as a SEAL, and because he was a linguist, and just it's sort of like a person being able to, and I'm always jealous of, sit down at a piano and play the piano by ear,
Mm-hmm.
and Jerry just had this incredible knack for languages, and
They had LPs in Vietnam also, listening posts.
yeah.
And they did sort of the same thing.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was SEALs or recon guys, but it was some specialists that went out there and did that. That was very helpful.
Oh, and again, these are things that we really know nothing about. And you know what? I'm about to mess up and go too long, and it's time. Here comes the guy that's going to beat me over the head with a ruler. Tom Foster, thank you for coming, and thank you for your service in Vietnam, and thank you for being in the Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame.
Thank you for having me, and God bless.
Thank you. You've been listening to America's Web Radio and David's Pick. We'll be back with more right after one word, and then we'll be right back.